In the wake of the Second World War, the United States and Soviet Union emerged as two global superpowers, each one with a very different idea of what a society should look like. The battle between communism and capitalism would continue for decades, but first boiled over in the Korean Peninsula in East Asia. To better understand the conflict, here are 5 facts you need to know about the Korean War. The first step in understanding the Korean War is to learn the geography. After Japan's surrender in 1945, the United States took control of the southern half of Korea, while the Soviet Union took the north. They were divided by the 38th parallel, a horizontal line that split the peninsula in two. Wasn't it the poet Robert Frost who said good fences make good neighbors? Well, in this case, he would have been wrong. North and South Korea were not too keen on accepting the new line drawn in the sand, and skirmishes between the new neighbors often flared up along the border. The United States and President Truman were deeply concerned with the spread of communism.
We are united in detesting communist slavery,
which they viewed as a direct threat to American democracy. Truman also wanted to prevent Russia from gaining any more territory and believed communist North Korea was the Russians' first step towards world domination. Therefore, he believed he had no choice but to stop the North Korean army after they invaded the South in June of 1950. At first, North Korean forces were victorious, driving South Korean and U.S. troops nearly out of the country by August. But with the help of the United Nations, the U.S. forces resupplied and rallied, recapturing the South Korean capital of Seoul in September and crossing the 38th parallel the month after. Korea was a country with freezing winters and broiling summers, making the actual combat miserable for both sides. Disease, malnutrition, and frostbite were constant worries. General Douglas MacArthur believed a total victory was the only acceptable outcome for the U.S. President Truman disagreed, but MacArthur was adamant, and after he was caught privately lobbying his views in Congress, Truman relieved him of duty for his insubordination. While all this was going down, North Korean forces had driven the UN troops back to the 38th parallel, and by May of 1951, the armies were more or less at a stalemate. For the next 2 years, neither side gained any significant ground, although fighting did continue both on land and in the air. Peace talks started in the summer of 1951, shortly after the start of the stalemate. Negotiations threatened to drag on even longer until President Dwight Eisenhower took office in 1953. Eisenhower was determined to end the war. Joseph Stalin, who wanted to keep the war going, died in March of that year. After a few months more of negotiation, the Armistice was signed in July, ending the 3+ year slog of fighting. The Korean War was a relatively short but costly conflict. 36,000 U.S. troops were killed, with over 100,000 wounded. 620,000 soldiers from North and South Korea were killed, but more disturbingly, 1.6 million civilians lost their lives throughout the Korean Peninsula. The 38th parallel still divides the two Koreas today, serving as a demilitarized zone. 4,400 yards of empty space separates the two countries, whose borders are defended by armed troops 24 hours a day, 365 days a year.